and for your words to us. We ask that you might make all of us just that little more able to see you and hear you, to know you and be like you. Have your way among us and be glorified, Lord. Amen. In the first chapter of the first book of The Hobbit, there's this beautiful scene, one of my favourite scenes in the book and in the movie. It's called An Unexpected Party. And here's this little hobbit, this little small, gentle human being off in the corner of the world, safely, happily living among his, among the vineyards and the fields and the community and his lovely little house, with everything as it should be, with all of his food stored for the season, with all of his grandparents' crockery and his rhythms and his ways, and here he is, very, very happy. And there comes a knock at the door. Now, his friend, the wizard Gandalf, had been there previously and sort of alluded to something coming, and spoken of an adventure and a bit of some mission, something beyond what he understood. And then he went off, and here's Bilbo, very, very happy again in his quiet little life, until this knock. And he opens the door, and here is a kind of a gruff, rough-looking dwarf, looking rather a bit warrior-like, a bit vagabond-like, and it's not someone you'd usually see in these parts, and he welcomes him in with a little bit of trepidation, and in comes this dwarf, and straight for the food, straight for the kitchen, and shortly there comes a series of knocks, and a number more of these dwarves come in, and there's a whole party of them now. They manage to eat his entire season's food, I believe, kind of emptying out his cellar, nearly breaking the precious crockery. Not quite, but they're jolly, and they sing and they eat and they have a wonderful time, and they speak of this mission, this call to gather and go on adventure together to claim their homeland. They've been lost, they've been without a homeland, and they want to reclaim this inheritance in this homeland. And so Bilbo, after being entirely scared and frustrated and angry and just baffled, he agrees to, he gets inspired by their cause, and he agrees to go on adventure with them. And that adventure is incredibly uncomfortable and scary. There's heroism, and there's grief, there's suffering, and there's wonder and awe, and all sorts of things are beyond what he could have hoped to have seen in his little corner of the world. And among it all, there's kind of this bigger wrestle between good and evil. And his small part, imperfectly played in the big adventure, causes something beyond him to happen. It causes this other culture, these other dwarves to reclaim their homeland. And so it's just this wonderful picture for us, I think, of something that Jesus does in our lives. Because as we're about to look at in the passage today, this knock at the door is not just for the end of the age. This being prepared for Jesus coming to the door is not just for the end of our lives and eternity after with him. There's something that he does within our lifetimes, multiple times in different seasons, where he comes to us in a way, kind of figuratively, or, he comes to into our lives, and he invites us into adventures. And he invites us into things that are entirely beyond us, quite foreign, quite scary, quite exciting. And he invites us into things that are very uncomfortable, sometimes incredibly painful. But if we are able to answer his knock and move into those adventures with him, we find that our small part, imperfectly played, causes God uses it to do things beyond us. He uses it for his mission in this world. He uses it to bless people and to bring about things in his good will and his good purpose and timing beyond what we ever could do, staying in our safe, familiar ways. And so there's an encouragement for us today of being prepared for that knock at the door. And of the way in Luke, I really enjoy in Luke, in this passage, that both Luke as the writer and Jesus in the passage, their hearts are to prepare those they're speaking to. So for Luke, the writer, he is writing during a time when life is getting quite chaotic. It's the time near to when Jerusalem is falling. There's kind of pushing back against Rome, and Rome, there's the destruction of the temple. There's all sorts happening in society that is making it really hard to live Jewish or Christian ways in a familiar pattern. When society's at war, or when temples or buildings or ways of life, ways of doing Christianity, ways of passing on knowledge from generation to generation, or being a society together, that's all being disrupted. And so for Luke, how is he going to offer the teachings of Jesus? How is he going to help prepare the believers and encourage the believers? And so he's writing down a number of things to be able to send out. There's a lot of dispersion happening, Christians and Jews heading out of Jerusalem, out to different parts. And so he is making the teachings and the life and the encouragement of Jesus accessible. He's making it able to be given out to those who are having to find new ways of life, having to be out on new adventures, and kind of wrestling with discomfort and with how to do life with God and how to be on adventure with Jesus. So Luke's doing that, and Jesus in our passage, he is with his disciples before he goes to the cross. And he's been with them for a number of years, and he knows what's to come. And he, in his heart, he represents the Father so perfectly, doesn't he? And like the good Father wants to prepare his children, wants to make them able to face what's coming and walk with him through it. And Jesus is doing this with his disciples. He is knowing what is to come, knowing that it's going to shake them up, that it's going to cause them to wrestle and try and figure out what is Jesus doing, what is happening, what is God meaning. And he's sitting there with his disciples, giving them teachings, giving them encouragements, speaking through stories in order to say, be prepared for these trials to come, and be ready for them. And so in the first part of our passage, Jesus, in that first part of preparing them, he is finishing what we looked at last week. He's finishing off these exhortations on really kind of letting go of the anxieties of this world, letting go of being so caught up in trying to find security and contentment and safety and all the things we want, trying to find them in our own possessions, in the things we own or the things that we do in this world. And so he is encouraging them in these three ways that I think we'll see throughout the passage: in worship and identity, in heart habits, and in active practices. So when he exhorts them to let go of anxiety and to trust in God, he is speaking to them as the little flock. He is speaking to them that their Father's good pleasure is to give them the kingdom. He reminds them in this verse of who they are, that they are the little flock who is cared for and led by the good shepherd, that God is for them, that he is their good father and their good shepherd, and that they can rest in that identity. They can worship God for who he is. And in remembering who God is and remembering who they are, that is one part of how they can release, get rid of anxiety, how they can stop clinging to the things of this world to try and find their security. He speaks to their heart habits. He says, do not be afraid. He says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He speaks to where their heart is in this. And like last week at Cafe Church, we talked about the idea of where our treasure is. We talked about this kind of idea about where about having things and what do we invest our hearts in, and how are we rich towards God? Is it that we have all these possessions, we have all this security, we have all this power, and we make ourselves feel good and feel rich and feel comfortable and feel like we're being successful or great for God? Or is it, regardless of how many possessions we do or don't have, is it that our hearts are invested in God and who he is and what Jesus has done for us? That we're able to fully trust that Jesus has died, that he has risen, that he has ascended into heaven, that he has reconciled us to God and made us part of God's family. And can we live in that? Can we fully trust in that? And so, living in that place in our hearts, can we let go of fear? Can we let go of the anxieties of this world and remain trusting, remain enjoying the treasure of being God's children, of knowing the Father? And so he speaks to the heart, he speaks to our identity and our heart, and then he speaks to active practices. He talks about selling possessions and giving alms, and he talks about the ways, not the ways in which we achieve that. Our outward practices shouldn't achieve that for us, but the ways in which we outwork where our heart is at. If we are trusting God and dwelling in him, then what are we doing about that? How is that flowing out of our hearts? And not just in giving everything away to try and sort of be good enough, but to hold our lives and our possessions lightly and to be able to share, to be able to be generous and give and offer help and support as God leads. And so Jesus begins with that exhortation. He says, he alludes to this as part of what makes you ready, is to be living in this way. And he moves right on from there to being watchful slaves, being servants of God, and being dressed ready for action, having our lamps lit, being like those servants, waiting and alert, ready to answer that door. And again, there's this idea of identity, of heart habits, and of active practices. And so if we think about this story that Jesus is creating, these servants, they know who they are and why they're there. They're dwelling in their master's house. They have relationship with him. They know what they're supposed to do to serve him. And they're secure in that. They're provided for in that. And so there's identity in that and relationship in that. And then the kind of speaking of having your lamps lit and of waiting and of being alert, these are heart habits. These are things that must be cultivated. Like Sally talked about, having our lamps lit. It's to do with worship. It's to do with being alive in God. It's to do with having our hearts alive and in relationship. And there's something about the encouragement to know how we are keeping our hearts alive with God. What are we doing to keep our hearts nurtured in that relationship with him? And the waiting and being alert, these are all sort of words and ways that we are alert, that we are, there's a posture of heart towards God. Trusting in him, waiting and trusting in him, and being and looking for him. If any of us have, like me, normal life wrestles, the ups and downs of life, and when things kind of sideswipe you, or you're trying to figure out, how do I be a Christian? How do I be faithful to you, God, in my workplace or in my family or in a particular situation that I'm working through? There's these two words, waiting and being alert, aren't super easy to outwork. To look for God and to seek him in those things that we face in life, to be alert and longing for him. That's one thing, and it requires continuing to believe and be hopeful and be able to step outside of our own capabilities and ask for his help and trust that he's going to be there. This alertness and this looking for, how are you going to lead me, Lord? How are you going to help me? How are you going to show me how to walk this out? And this waiting on him, this patience to not just run ahead and try and fix it all ourselves, or just do what we think we should be doing, or just not think that he's showing up or revealing for us the answer quickly enough, and so just going for it. This waiting is hard. Waiting for his leading, waiting for his encouragement, waiting for his timing. It's not easy to hold these heart postures, but Jesus asks this. He examples it in this story of faithful servants. And they're being very practical. They're dressed, ready for action, and they're capable of opening the door. They're able to do what he's asked them to be ready to do. And so there's these again, active practices. And we, if you're anything like me, would love to say that, here's some very straightforward encouragements from Jesus. These are things, maybe we think we should be able to attain quite easily. But often we can fluctuate. We can get caught up in the anxieties of this world. Even as Christians, um, the Western world is built on this kind of striving for goals and possessions and power and security and love. And we think, oh, well, I'm saved and I've come to Jesus. And so all of that stuff, that's for people who don't know Jesus. You know, maybe they're running after those things. But often what we find is that we've come to Jesus, but we've just transferred that same mode of operating to kind of a Christian version. And so we might, strive often to achieve Christianity. We strive for church goals, for resources, for power, for security, for love from God in our own ways. And if we're not attentive to it, we get ourselves into these anxious rhythms of life, trying to be a Christian, trying to know that we're good enough for God. And Jesus invites us to step out of that. Because whenever we're putting our trust in anything else to achieve love or power or security, we inevitably burn out. It exhausts us. We were never made to find power or love or security or any of that in anything else. Nothing else satisfies that in us. And so we burn out, we get hurt, we get discouraged, we get shamed sometimes, and then we can easily swing from an anxious striving into kind of the self-soothing, self-comforting, self-protecting ways as a Christian. And we find ways, when we've done that swing, we find ways of doing Christianity and life that are very much within our own control. It makes us feel very safe. We want to make sure that we are covering up our wounds, avoiding our fears, locking our doors and saying, no adventures, thank you. And I think Jesus, at the end of the passage, he warns that if we're going to not be prepared for the adventures, for his knock at the door, we're going to find it really tough when that happens. Because in all of our lives, we will face seasons that take us out of our norm, that take us into suffering sometimes. It might be, or it might be a sickness or a family member with an illness. It might be grief or loss. It might be just the discomfort and unknown and terrifying coming into parenthood or figuring out doing life alone in a new way, or family moving. Could be jobs or season changes. There are things that we will face. And if we haven't noticed Jesus at the door inviting us to follow him into the adventure, then we'll head into these seasons kind of tumbling, like being swept up in a wave. And we'll head into these seasons head over heels, confused and kind of being a bit bruised and thinking that God's forsaken us. And it will be really tough and really painful. And so Jesus, his heart is to say, hey, let's get ready for these seasons together. Let's think about what we're trusting in. Let's think about whether we're living a life that is caught up in anxieties or dwelling in our identity in God and worshiping him. Let's think about, especially if we've found a way to get rid of anxiety, let's not relax and just think it's all going to be sweet. Let's realize that actually we still need to be actively journeying with God and doing things, practicing ways that keep our hearts and souls and minds ready and alert and in deep relationship with God. Jesus uses that imagery from Exodus. In this passage, he uses the imagery from that first Passover when God asked the Israelites to be eating the first Passover dressed and ready to go. And God leads them, he rescues them from slavery and leads them through the desert, teaching them and transforming them and journeying with them. And he does the same with us. He asks us to be ready and alert and ready to go out into these adventures with him, where he never leaves us alone, but leads us on step by step, teaching us and helping us let go of things that were never helpful to us anyway, helping us to confront griefs or overwhelm or discomfort or hunger or whatever it is, fears, and helps us to journey with him through tough stuff and to find him in it, to meet with him in it, to be surprised by his provision, by his protection, by his faithfulness, and to come out the other side a different person than we went in. So let's think about the ways in which we are getting ready for Jesus' knock at the door. Let's think about the ways in which we are worshipping God and knowing our identity. The ways in which we have to, to worship, to practice heart habits, and to let our faith out through our actions and behavior. It requires intention. It requires choice. Jesus has made the way for us. It requires our answer and our response in daily life and weekly life. And so let's think really today about how are we worshipping God? What are we doing in our daily life and our weekly life to continually worship him, to look at him, and to remember who he is, and to remember who we are? There's been times recently where God's asked me to be kneeling with him. And I think sometimes our posture in the way that we worship or pray, in the ways that we sit still with him and just look upon him, think upon who he is, our posture does something in us. And there's been times where God said, come and be still with me and kneel and just remember who I am. And if we can hear his invitations and meet him in these ways, it does something in us. It keeps us out of familiar anxieties. And there's many, many ways that we can worship him: in music, in silence, in creation, through the Bible, alone or gathered. But let's be thinking about his invitation to us. How are we daily and weekly looking upon him and remembering who he is and remembering who we are? And let's secondly be thinking about how are we training our hearts through spiritual disciplines. Those heart habits. We will have heard from different research, consistent and repetitive practices train us, don't they? And it's no different in Christianity. So what are our practices? What are our ways of training our hearts and nurturing our hearts to continue to trust, to continue to discover God, to continue to be like him? Through prayer, through Bible study, through worship or gathering, through giving or gratitude, silence or fasting. There's so many, there's different books and different things around which we can look at and find practices that we do that train our hearts and nurture our hearts to be ready for when Jesus knocks at the door. He speaks to us and meets us in those practices. And he teaches and he forms something in us through them. Specifically for me, recently there's been just a real joy in journaling and kind of processing. And there's different seasons for different things, aren't there? But just really being attentive to gratitude, especially when I've faced painful situations or unknown situations, and to be thinking daily, God, what have you done for me? And to be thankful for that. And to be journaling and letting my soul process with God all that's going on. It can be so helpful to meet with God in really specific ways regularly. And then from those two things, from our practices with God, then let's think about how we let our faith flow out through our actions and behaviors. So that how we treat people with our words, our behavior, our actions, our emotions, brings harm or brings healing. We can be a life-giving witness, or we can be a stumbling block to their journey in faith. And so the way that we let our faith out, the way that we just are present with people. For me, sometimes the way that if I'm able in my own private time with God to be open and vulnerable, to be letting the wrestles out, and so experiencing how he sees me, how he hears me and doesn't reject me when I'm weak and vulnerable and feeling like I'm just not being good enough or whatever it is. If I can experience that with God in my relationship with him, then I can be that for somebody else. I can let them open up. I can let them be imperfect. I can hear wherever they're at, their journey, and I can practice being present with them, seeing them, hearing them, and cheering them on. And there's all sorts of ways. There is sharing and giving gifts and helping people practically. And there's also just the ways in which we are kind or respectful, the ways in which we are happy to see someone or have really good boundaries with people, and so treat ourselves and them with respect. And there's all these details of the way that we do life with others that are a witness, that give them an experience of Jesus. And so just to I know I've probably gone on a bit, but just to finish, I'll be shorter next time. Sorry, Anne. So just to finish, there's Jesus shows us the good Father. He shows us the good shepherd, who God is to us. And he shows us that we're going to face stuff in life, but we're not going to face it alone. And we don't have to face it unprepared. That he encourages us to be worshiping God and knowing our identity. He encourages us to be attentive to nurturing our hearts through those spiritual disciplines. He encourages us to practice our faith, to let it flow out towards others in our actions, our behavior. And in these ways, as we journey with God daily and weekly in these ways, we become ready to answer his knock. We become ready to step out into adventures that will still be scary. They'll still be painful at times. They'll still be weird and unfamiliar and full of wonder and awe and terrifying. But we will be able to do them with Jesus. and they will be life-giving, not just for us, but God will use our part in them to bless others and to do something that we never could ourselves. So be encouraged today, and let's just think about what Jesus is asking of us in those things. Amen.
Those were such things that were on your heart, Emily. Let's have just a moment of quiet, and as Helen comes into our time of intercession, as we just sing this very gentle prayer, "Be still for the presence of the Lord." I know that I am God. Sorry, Helen's going to lead us in a time of prayer, and then we'll come into our time of Holy Communion. So let's sing. Be still and know that I am God. And know that I am God. Still that I am God. The Lord, that He